Something just happened in the Middle East that most people are not talking about yet. And when the full picture becomes clear, it is going to change how you understand everything unfolding right now in this region. The United States just rejected Iran's ceasefire offer. Not quietly, not diplomatically, flatly, firmly. And with a message attached that left zero room for misinterpretation. And the reason behind that rejection is far more alarming than the rejection itself. Because what American officials discovered about what Iran was doing behind the scenes, while simultaneously offering peace, while simultaneously sending negotiators to the table, while simultaneously calling for calm, is the kind of revelation that does not just end a negotiation. It ends an era. Stay with us. Because this story is moving faster than almost anyone realizes, and by the time you finish watching this, you will understand exactly why the Middle East is now standing at the edge of something that could reshape the entire region for the next generation. Let us start with what most people think they know. Most people think this is a simple story. Iran is weak, America is strong. Iran asked for a ceasefire, America said no. End of story. But that is not the story. That is barely even the beginning of the story. Because to understand why the United States walked away from that table, you have to understand what Iran actually brought to that table. And more importantly, what Iran was hiding underneath it. For weeks, Iranian officials had been signaling through back-channel intermediaries, through Omani diplomats, through Pakistani mediators, through quiet conversations in the corridors of international institutions, that Tehran was ready to talk seriously, that the strikes had hurt, that the regime understood the situation had changed, that there was genuine willingness to reach an agreement. The Americans listened. They sent their delegation. They sat down. They came with terms. And then something happened in that room that fundamentally altered the trajectory of this entire crisis. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand the full weight of what Iran was walking into those talks carrying. Because context is everything here, and the context is devastating. Go back to February 28th, 2026. That is the date when everything changed, when the United States and Israel launched one of the most precisely coordinated military operations in modern history against the Islamic Republic of Iran. What followed was not a skirmish. It was not a limited strike. It was a systematic, layered, devastatingly effective campaign that tore through the command and control structure of the Iranian state in ways that even the most pessimistic analysts inside the regime had not prepared for. The results were staggering. More than 52 confirmed senior Iranian officials and commanders eliminated. The head of the IRGC, the head of IRGC intelligence, the head of the IRGC Navy, senior Basijay commanders, missile program directors, intelligence chiefs. The entire upper architecture of Iran's military and security apparatus decapitated in a matter of hours. And at the very top of that list, the name that changed everything, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had held absolute power over Iran for more than 3 decades, killed in a precision strike on his own compound in Tehran, the single most consequential leadership loss in the history of the Islamic Republic. Gone. Think about what that means for a regime that had built its entire identity, its entire political structure, its entire claim to legitimacy around one man's supreme authority. Not just a military loss, a civilizational rupture. And yet, even after all of that, something remarkable happened. Iran did not collapse overnight. The regime, or what remained of it, held together, barely, fractiously, chaotically, but it held, and it began reaching out, quietly at first, then more openly. Ceasefire, they said. Let us talk, they said. We are ready to negotiate seriously, they said. And this is where the story takes a turn that most analysts missed entirely. Because the question was never whether Iran was willing to talk. The question was whether Iran was capable of telling the truth at the table. The answer, it turns out, was no. Here is what American intelligence discovered in the days leading up to the ceasefire talks in Islamabad. While Iranian negotiators were publicly signaling readiness for a comprehensive deal, while Ali Larijani, now effectively the most powerful figure in what remains of the Iranian leadership, was sending messages through Omani mediators about Iran's genuine desire for peace, a completely different set of activities was happening underground. Literally underground. Iranian technicians, protected by whatever remained of the IRGC's operational units, had resumed work at several deeply buried nuclear facilities that the initial strikes had not fully destroyed. Not civilian work, not maintenance, active enrichment activities, at facilities that the whole premise of the ceasefire was supposed to freeze permanently. The Americans knew, not because of a leak, not because of a spy, because of something far more sophisticated. The intelligence picture that had guided the February 28th strikes had not gone dark after those strikes ended. It had, if anything, become more detailed, more precise, more current. President Trump himself had hinted at this when he told reporters in the days after the operation that American intelligence knew exactly who was where and when throughout the entire campaign. 49 leaders eliminated in a single coordinated operation. That level of precision does not come from luck. It comes from a surveillance architecture of extraordinary depth. And that same architecture was watching what Iran was doing underground while its diplomats were smiling across the table in Islamabad. When American negotiators confronted the Iranian delegation with what they knew, the response was not an apology. It was not an explanation. It was the same thing Iranian officials had been doing for more than a decade at every critical moment in every serious negotiation. Denial, deflection, and then escalating demands. The Iranian side, according to multiple regional sources, insisted that any enrichment activity taking place was entirely civilian in nature, that it fell within Iran's rights under international law, that America had no business making demands about what happened inside Iran's sovereign territory. Then they presented their own list of demands, and this is where the word staggering genuinely applies. Full and formal international acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium domestically. Complete lifting of all primary and secondary American sanctions, immediately and unconditionally. Termination of all UN Security Council resolutions targeting Iran. Full withdrawal of all United States combat forces from bases across the broader Middle East region. And financial compensation for all damages suffered during the war, to be collected not through direct payment, but through tariffs levied on every vessel passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Read that last one again. Iran, a country whose supreme leader had just been killed, whose military command structure had been gutted, whose soldiers were literally fleeing into Afghanistan using fake passports and disguises to escape, was demanding that the United States pay it money, through a mechanism that would effectively give Tehran a permanent tax on 20% of the world's oil supply. That was the offer Iran brought to the ceasefire table. The Americans did not just reject it, they walked out. And then something happened that very few people noticed at the time, but that may prove to be the most significant diplomatic development of this entire crisis. The United States did not walk away quietly, it walked away with a warning. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had already laid out the strategic logic months earlier in language that left absolutely no ambiguity. His words bear repeating here because they explain everything that has happened since. Peaceful nuclear ambitions do not need to be buried underneath mountains. 6 words. Buried underneath mountains. That phrase is not just a line from a press statement. It is the entire American strategic framework for this conflict compressed into a single image. The argument is not that Iran cannot have civilian nuclear energy. The argument is that the only reason to bury a nuclear facility under a mountain is because you are afraid someone might try to destroy it. And the only reason to be afraid of that is because you are not actually using it for peaceful purposes. Iran buried its facilities under mountains because Iran intended to build a bomb. The Americans had concluded that. The Israelis had concluded that. And the military campaign was the conclusion of that conclusion. Now, with the ceasefire expired and both sides unable to bridge what is not just a gap in policy, but a chasm in fundamental strategic vision, the question hanging over everything is what happens next. And here is where things get genuinely dangerous. President Trump has made clear, through public statements and through the intelligence signals being sent via ongoing military positioning, that the option of resuming strikes is not just theoretical, it is operational. According to multiple sources, targets have already been identified. The planning that guided the February 28th operation did not end when the initial ceasefire was declared. It continued. It was updated. It was refined. Operation Epic Fury, the U.S. naval blockade currently strangling Iran's ability to move goods and energy through the Persian Gulf, is simultaneously a military instrument and a negotiating tool. It is designed to increase pressure on the Iranian economy to the point where the regime's internal contradictions become unmanageable, where the factional fighting that Iran expert Saeed Golkar described, the fight that began the moment the main arbitrator, the supreme leader, was gone, tears the regime apart from within rather than from without. That strategy may already be working. Because here is the part of the current situation that is not getting the attention it deserves. The IRGC is fracturing. Not metaphorically, not theoretically. Actually fracturing in real time, in ways that the organization has never experienced before in its entire history. Field commanders are threatening open defection. Not individual commanders acting alone, but organized groups of senior officers who have concluded that the current leadership of the Islamic Republic is incapable of making the decisions necessary to stop the bleeding. These are the men who were supposed to be the iron backbone of the Iranian military state, the true believers, the ideologically committed core of a force built specifically to be immune to the kind of pressure that destroyed conventional armies, and they are threatening to walk. IRGC soldiers, ordinary rank-and-file members, not commanders, not officers, but soldiers who signed up to defend the revolution, have been filmed crossing into Afghanistan. through border regions that are themselves among the most dangerous in the world, using fake passports, wearing disguises, risking their lives to get out rather than continue serving a regime they no longer believe in or no longer trust to keep them alive. If you want one image that tells you everything about the current state of Iranian military morale, that is the image. Not a defiant press conference from Tehran, not missiles being paraded through the streets, IRGC soldiers running toward Afghanistan to escape. And simultaneously, at the other end of the chain of command, IRGC Commander Ahmad Vahidi has been trying to do something that would have been unthinkable even 6 months ago. He is attempting to assert the IRGC's dominance over every critical and sensitive position remaining in the Iranian state, effectively declaring that whatever Iran becomes on the other side of this war, it will be an IRGC state, controlled entirely by the organization, answering to no civilian authority. That power grab is itself a symptom of the crisis. Because if the IRGC truly controlled everything, Vahidi would not need to announce it. The announcement is the proof that the control is not yet established, that the factional fight is live, that the outcome is not settled. And that factional uncertainty is precisely what makes this moment so unpredictable and so dangerous, because a regime that is unified, even an adversarial regime, is in some ways easier to negotiate with than a regime that is internally at war with itself. You can make a deal with a unified adversary. You can make commitments that both sides can trust. But when the entity across the table does not fully control its own institutions, when a foreign minister commits to terms that a military commander can simply ignore or actively undermine, the architecture of any agreement becomes fundamentally unstable before the ink is even dry. That is the trap Iran is now in. And it is a trap entirely of its own making. Pakistani, Egyptian, and Turkish mediators are still working, around the clock, in intense contact with both delegations. All of them nominally believe a deal remains possible. All of them understand that the alternative is a resumption of military operations that could be even more devastating than the first round. But the gaps are not gaps that close with clever diplomatic language. They are structural. They reflect two completely different visions of what Iran is allowed to be. The United States is demanding complete dismantlement of Iran's uranium enrichment infrastructure, handover of more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, a fundamental restructuring of Iran's military posture and regional behavior. These are not the terms of a negotiated settlement between equals. These are the terms of strategic transformation. Iran, despite everything, despite the losses, despite the IRGC soldiers in Afghanistan, despite the factional chaos, despite the gutted command structure, is still demanding full recognition of its nuclear rights. All sanctions lifted, compensation paid, U.S. forces withdrawn from the region. These two positions are not just far apart. They are oriented in opposite directions. One side is asking Iran to become a fundamentally different state. The other side is insisting it remain fundamentally the same state, just with fewer bombs falling on it. Bridging that is not a matter of finding the right phrase or the right mediator or the right meeting venue. It requires one side or both to make a decision that goes to the core of what they believe they are. And right now, Iran cannot make that decision. Not because it does not want to, but because it is not clear who inside Iran actually has the authority to make it. With the supreme leader gone, with the IRGC fighting for control, with field commanders threatening defection and ordinary soldiers crossing into Afghanistan and a foreign minister going on television to spin catastrophic losses as signs of resilience that no one believes, the Islamic Republic is performing strength as a substitute for strength itself. It has done this for 40 years. The performance was always the point. The slogans, the marches, the chants of death to America, the missile parades, the proxy networks stretching from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq, all of it was a performance designed to project a power that was never quite as solid as it appeared. Now the curtain has been pulled back, and the audience, including many inside Iran itself, has stopped believing the show. Trump's public offer to IRGC members and security forces to defect with full immunity was not delivered into a vacuum. It was delivered into this specific environment of fracture and disillusionment. His exact words to the Revolutionary Guards were direct and personal in a way that official statements rarely are. Lay down your arms, and you will be treated fairly with total immunity, or face certain death. There is no diplomatic cushioning there, no careful State Department language designed to leave room for interpretation. It is a personal offer to individuals asking them to make a personal choice, and it is designed to accelerate exactly the kind of internal fracturing that is already visibly underway. Whether that offer produces a mass defection, a organized military mutiny, a quiet surrender of key facilities, or something else entirely, is the open question that no analyst in the world can answer with certainty right now. What is certain is that the architecture of Iran's power, the structure that the Islamic Republic built over 4 decades to ensure its own survival, has been more severely damaged in the past several months than in any previous period of the regime's history. The nuclear program, the program that consumed trillions of dollars and decades of effort and brought Iran to this moment, lies in ruins beneath the rubble of those buried facilities. The supreme leader is gone. The command structure is fractured. The military's morale is in genuine freefall. The economic pressure of the naval blockade is tightening every week. The diplomatic isolation is deepening. More countries are designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization. More European allies are being urged to reimpose sanctions. More regional players are quietly recalculating their relationship with Tehran. And the ceasefire that was supposed to create space for a negotiated resolution has expired without an agreement, with both sides unable to close a gap that reflects not just policy differences, but fundamentally incompatible visions of what Iran's future looks like. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, urging European allies to act fast on reimposing sanctions, is sending a signal that Washington is preparing for a longer campaign of pressure if the diplomatic track fails. The United States is not treating this as a crisis to be managed. It is treating it as a transformation to be completed. Dan Shapiro of the Atlantic Council put the challenge in terms that every serious observer of this conflict needs to hear. Getting all of those things, the nuclear program, the missile programs, the proxies, out of one meeting was never realistic. He is right. This will not be resolved in one meeting. It will not be resolved in 3. The architecture of whatever replaces the old Iran will take months, perhaps years to negotiate. But the direction of travel is now set in a way it simply was not before February 28th. The era of Iran as a defiant, expansionist nuclear threshold state is over. The question is not whether that era ended. The question is what comes next, and who inside Iran has the authority, the courage, and the strategic vision to navigate what comes next, without tipping the country into something even more dangerous and chaotic than what it is already experiencing. That is the question that will define the Middle East for the next generation. And it does not have an answer yet. What we know right now, at this precise moment, is this. The ceasefire has expired. The talks have failed. The naval blockade is tightening. American strike planning has not been suspended. Iranian enrichment activity has not stopped. The IRGC is fracturing from within. Mediators from 3 countries are working around the clock to prevent the next escalation. And a regime that spent 40 years performing invincibility is now quietly, desperately trying to find a way out of a crisis it spent 40 years creating. They waited too long. They should have given what was very practical and easy to do sooner. Those are Trump's words. And stripped of the political packaging, they are simply accurate. Iran had years to make a deal that preserved its dignity, its sovereignty, and its future. It had diplomatic off-ramps that other countries would have seized immediately. It had moments where a different choice at the negotiating table would have changed everything. It chose differently, every single time. And now the bill has come due, and the world is watching to see whether what comes next is a negotiated transformation or a second wave of destruction that leaves even less to negotiate over. One thing is certain, whatever Iran looks like on the other side of this, it will not look like the Iran that entered it. The show is over. What replaces it is the story the entire world is now waiting to see.